Kartik as a webinar with Mike Rogers. Dave Eder got the fun of sitting through it yesterday, but a few technical glitches, so we wanted to film it today so that what they post will be with a little bit fewer technical glitches. That'll be fine. Thank you, Dave. So what I want to do then is go through some of the background of where this came from, a sort of quick overview of transportation and health that I assume most of you have had at least some of, but probably in varying amounts, so that I'll go through that relatively quickly, and then focus most of it on the research roadmap, and in particular picking out some of the highlights of the roadmap, because it's a lengthy document that has lots of stuff in it, and I have a feeling when you get a long document like that, nobody has time to read the whole thing, so by picking out a few things, get some value there. Okay, so very briefly, hopefully all of you have had this kind of information in something you've been taught, or should have had this kind of information. Links between transportation and health, the three big ones being air pollution and motor vehicle crashes have been real well known in the transportation community, and then more recently, information on physical activity has started to get attention. They're the ones, if you say transportation and health, air pollution is kind of the top of everybody's list. It's what a lot of people work on, and then these other two very important. But then beyond that, the broader links get into noise, water quality, climate change, mental health, community connectedness, environmental justice, access to goods and services, resilience, a whole range of issues. So if you're looking at the big picture, you're looking at that longer list. In the public health world, we use this term social determinants of health, and we're aware that much of health is caused by lots of factors in the environment around us, and you'll see transportation is one of the many things, along with housing, education, income, a whole range of issues that contribute to health, and transportation is on that list. Some of the barriers, and Catherine mentioned it right in her introduction, language, that we do speak different languages coming from the public health world. One of the earliest ones I ran into was NMT is non-motorized transport. What are you talking about? Walking the bike? Yeah, this isn't the words that are being used. And go the other direction, words like morbidity, used routinely in public health, but we see twice we said that word, you talk in other worlds, what's that? Walking without. You get a lot of words like that. We also find data issues can be different than in the transportation world, something like injuries. So we do an intervention, we can measure, hey, injury rates got better. But a lot of public health is long-term chronic diseases. Those are numbers that are very long-term. Interventions don't make a difference in the long-term. I put in something that will help physical activity, it's going to reduce obesity. That's many, many years, and it's going to be hard to show it all. It's not something to, quick fix, and you'll see those numbers get better. The other issue that we ran into early on that has certainly gotten better is health. Health is not my department's mission when you talk to transportation people. And gradually that has clearly gotten better. And one way of looking at that is if you look at the mission of the U.S. Department of Transportation, look at their wording. Their wording has words like safety, efficiency that can relate to bikes and pedestrians and transit, quality of life is very much a health issue, clean air, congestion, equity, very central to public health. These are all words that, that all Americans in the terminology. So within their mission, even the word health is most certainly not there. A lot of the words there have very health relationships. And then from the environmental health and public health side, the public health world is gradually understanding that transportation and land use really matter. It's what we've been working on for quite a while, but it's taken a while to get that across. So what's called the Guide to Community Preventive Services, which guides rigorous reviews by CDC and led by CDC, looking at how do we make the world better for public health, now has a formal recommendation, and all recommendations there are based on a very rigorous review of the evidence that looks at improving pedestrian and bicycle and transit interventions and land use interventions will make a difference in physical activity. So the public health world is kind of catching on to the built environment world and vice versa. Within the transportation world, the Transportation Research Boards, or that lead agency of the National Academies, started in, 2011 to have a subcommittee looking at transportation and health, and that's very much in the right direction. You get into two fields talking to each other. and that has had some very good interactions of getting health and transportation people to talk to each other. And the big news there is that with a reorganization within TRB, we are moving from a subcommittee to a full committee. That doesn't sound like much, but in the transportation world and at TRB, that actually is a big deal because it's the amount of recognition and importance of the topic when that kind of a reorganization goes on. So that's quick and dirty background of the links. What I want to spend the time on then is this report. This report was done through the National Cooperative Hybrid Research Program and CHRP. And what that is, for those who aren't familiar, because I didn't know when we first got involved with it, the state highway departments, state transportation departments, to be careful there. State transportation departments realize that there are issues in transportation that are important for all states. And so they put money, millions of dollars, into a large pot of money called NCHRP, and then projects can be done that then will serve all the state departments of transportation. So this is money that came from NCHRP to create a research roadmap of what's needed in that link between transportation and health. And the link is there in terms of how to get to it. It's research report number 932. If you just put in NCHRP 932, it'll come up. So the actual work itself, I was on the oversight panel at NCHRP to help make this project move forward. Was delighted to be part of that. The panel wrote the request for proposals. It went out competitively. We had something like 18 different organizations apply. The winner was UNC Chapel Hill, which is the group here that did the actual work. The lead was Laura Sant, and they had about 15 people there coming from UNC Chapel Hill, along with VHB, American Planning Association, and several independent consultants. They had a really good team together of people experienced in the field to put this work together. So what I am presenting today is their work. We had some oversight of it, but the actual work was done by the team that you see in front of you. So the next number of slides actually come directly from UNC, because one of their products along with the report was put together a slideshow to discuss what the report does, and some of those are what I'll be showing. And these slides I'm very happy to share anywhere you want. You can either post them on your website here, email me, I'm happy to send them to you. So this is looking at how UNC took on the task. I think it was about 18 months or so to pull things together. And what they essentially did was wanted to gather information on the state of the field. What do we know about current research, and then what's still needed. And so they looked at the background and some of what you saw earlier, looking at goods and services and physical activity, air and noise pollution and injuries, and the background issues of with a good broad look. One of the things that the oversight panel that we did was to say that air pollution and injuries are really fairly well studied, and to put more of their focus on the other areas that link between transportation and health. So they were purposely not doing a massive literature reviews of air pollution pathway health, because I know that we need to hear more on that. As they looked at it, they realized that there's quite a few links between transportation policy, road design, maintenance. You can get multiple pathways that go from things going on in the transportation world to a single health outcome in that direction, as well as the other way. A single thing in the transportation world can lead to multiple health outcomes. And this is we know it's a complex situation. And when you start to put them together with boxes and arrows, here's really the simple version of some of the boxes and arrows that would connect transportation and health. And if you wanted to really fill that out, you would have dozens and dozens of boxes and arrows and one of these very complex things that get so complex it's not even all that useful at that point. So the actual steps taken by UNC were to research the literature, looked at probably, I think, thousands that were scanned. They ended up with 300 plus that they referenced in the final report. They looked at a lot of gray literature, institutional and agency reports and strategic plans. They looked at what's called research needs statements and research in progress. So TRB collects information on things that are either underway or things that need to be done. So there was a fair number of them already on the records of TRB. And then they did some focus groups and interviews and did everything from rural and urban and states and cities and federal, state, and local, and talk to public health, talk to people in transportation, talk to CDC and federal highways and TRB. So they did a really nice job. And they had like $250,000 to work with. They had enough resource to really do a thorough job of talking to people and looking at what literature was out there. As they were looking at the literature, they looked at various key terms, and here's just some of the kinds of terms, such as physical activity and equity and access and accessibility and so forth. So that's in the health world. In the transportation world, they looked at words like policy and planning, health impact analyses, and project design, and so forth. So they did a very nice scan of what was out there. So what they found, and this is, findings of what exists before they got to what is needed. What they found is a fair amount has actually been done. And what's interesting is these come from really both worlds. So the document you see on this side is from American Public Health Association, so from the public health world. The blue one over there is American Planning Association. The white ones are from Volpe, which is part of the Department of Transportation. So work has been done in both worlds already, looking at health and transportation. They also looked at what models are out there. Many of you may have heard of things like the HEAT tool and the IFIN tool and so forth, and there's a whole series of different tools that can be used for looking at health and transportation. The last one there is one that comes from EPA, the Dennenberg one. And some of their findings, they also want to see how is health being looked at in transportation agencies. And they found everything from executive legislative mandates, different types of collaboration between agencies, sharing data, integrating data, getting health decision-making tools, setting health performance targets, pilot testing different types of technologies, doing various data collection on physical activity and health. And so they found quite a few things are already going on that the two sides are talking to each other. And they also look at what are some of the emerging issues of what's out there. It's everything from micromobility with shared bikes and electric scooters and autonomous vehicles, what happens in rural areas and how to work with big data. And quite a range of things that are emerging areas in which more work is needed. And so in putting their research roadmap together, they organized it in the document that Catherine held up, looking at how does the transportation world actually get things done. And they worked through such areas as planning and policy making and capital programs and monitoring and the various steps that are actually normally used in the transportation world, so that they wanted to align things with how things actually get done. All right, so here's the document, the one held up. The link is there, it's easy to find. This one has 64 pages. They found 44 research gaps, 122 research needs, and then the background materials are another 50 or 100 pages. If you go to that link, you'll get both this report plus all those background materials. So you've got probably several hundred pages of terrific product. And as mentioned, it's very hard. Nobody really wants to sit down and read all of that. So I started working with Laura Sands, who was the principal investigator, and Daniel Rodriguez from Berkeley, who's been one of the key players in the field, and saying, well, could we take a subset of this and highlight a subset of some of the key questions and then publish that separately? And what we're aiming for, we're working on that paper now, that's what I'm presenting today, is to get something in the Journal of Transportation and Health, because that is a journal that really reaches both audiences and gets more to the academic world. This, because it came from HPRG, is focused on state departments of transportation. That's where the money came from. That's how the whole thing had to be written. And so Laura and Daniel and I decided, well, we'll aim for 20. Seems like a reasonable number that we could talk about each one without overloading, but still try to capture some of the more important questions. And so we wanted some criteria, which 20 should we take out of that 100 and something ideas, and came up with this list that we want to make sure that it clearly had health and transportation, that it would be practical to do something in an academic setting, that it could influence policy on various levels, not limited just to the state level, that it would have equity issues that's potentially useful longer term, that it was innovative, and that it would ideally have more than one health and or travel mobility. So that was kind of our background in going through that longer list and trying to pick some out. So what I want to do then is go through the 20, spend a little bit of time on each, and the numbers so you know what it is. toward the end of the 20. And then really just open it to discussion. And so each of these is potentially a researchable idea. Now, what format and how to pull that research together, we're still thinking. What we would like to do is put in the paper something about here's some approaches to do it. So these are more the topic areas without saying how do you get that research done, but at least it opens it to areas. And we're thinking once we get something together, I've been involved in research agendas in the past, that actually students as well as faculty, when they're looking at possible topics, sometimes pick things off for research agendas and end up using them for a thesis or using them for a research project or applying for funding. I think we have enough time as I go through. If there's something you want to stop along the way through, that's fine. Otherwise, we can talk at the end, go back to any of the ones on here. All right, so let's start with the points. First one is transportation demand management tools commonly used in the transportation world. How can we look at them from the health and equity point of view? That a lot of them, land use, travel pricing, transit, and other issues, all focus on sort of efficiency of how do you get transportation managed well, but not so much health and equity. And so how do you get to that equity and health outcome in relation to these tools? And then again, these are fairly complex problems that we need to think through. What would a research project look like to answer a question like that? The second one is measures of performance. Again, in the transportation world, commonly used, often use things like level of service, that a project is good if it reduces congestion and gets more cars moving faster. Well, from the health point of view, more cars faster is not promoting health, it's really in the opposite direction. And from what I understand, Caltrans in California actually changed their intent from level of service over to reduction in vehicle miles traveled, which is a really big deal in terms of, from the health point of view, reducing VMT makes a really big difference. Level of service is really anti-health in a sense, because it is sort of more cars faster. So how do you get policies to, how do you get the measures of performance so they are more health promoting and analyze them and evaluate whether they really do what you think? So there's a whole range of issues on measures of performance. Next one is looking at resilience and disaster planning. And we have climate change coming, a lot of impacts headed that way. There are a lot of transportation issues related to climate change, and particularly weather issues, hurricanes, flooding, drought, temperature extremes, a whole range of things. So when you have major airports and rail lines and things just waiting for sea level rise to take them out, or hurricanes and flooding, all sorts of issues. What are some of the health implications that you can get in as you're working on systems to be more resilient to disasters? Can you also have them health promoting? And along with that is looking at some emerging technologies in relation to resilience and disasters. So, autonomous vehicles and micromobility, what's their implication in disasters? Well, it's not like autonomous vehicles is relying on a lot of technology and satellites and systems working. How well is an autonomous vehicle going to know that the road just got washed out ahead of you if it's working on a map that supposedly knew what was there? How well can you understand what to even function in a disaster situation, or are they going to be non-functional if you're in that kind of setting? Next one is on travel demand modeling and forecasting, particularly in the bicycle, pedestrian, and transit travel demand. We do pretty well for motor vehicles in forecasting demand, but have you ever seen something that forecasts pedestrian demand? I'm not sure I have. It's certainly going to be more difficult to forecast bike and head demand. So there's work that can be done, and some of these are not easily done, but are well worth exploring some of those possibilities. Next one is looking at what gets counted counts. So what can you monitor well? And things like physical activity, we're getting more tools that allow things like bicycle pedestrian counts, and we're getting more wrist watch things that Fitbits and stuff that do counts. Can we validate those so that as we collect data through these different systems, we know what we're getting is information that's worth having? So, and how can some of that better data be used for promoting health and equity? So again, linking all these to training, so you have those measurement tools and improving them. Along with that is a lot of information is collected in travel surveys, as well as in, can we get more health questions into travel surveys? Can we get validated questions? So the National Household Travel Survey has a few things in it. There's been communication between DOT and CDC trying to increase the number of questions that are related to health that show up in the National Household Travel Survey. But there's also health surveys out there. Can we get more on behavior, physical activity, and travel into health surveys? Because transportation is one of the determinants of health. So to the extent that we can get good questions, and actually you want questions used in multiple places so things are comparable, not read-effect questions every time you do one. So there's a whole range of issues there on how to get better questions into the surveys. Next one has to do with getting health indicators into transportation project prioritization criteria. And Jimmy, I guess Nashville did some of this. I think Nashville was actually one of the leaders. Were you there while they were working on it with Leslie? And there's a lot that can be done there because transportation has to make choices. Are we spending money on this or on that? And to the extent if what's in there is just more cars faster, you end up with one product. If you say, well, what does this do for health and equity? And it becomes part of priority of where some of that money is spent. It really will make a difference to health in the long term. So what health indicators will be there? How can we measure? How can we use? How much weight should be given to the health thing versus more cars faster? So there's a lot of good issues on that are worthy of more work. Another one has to do with what health data our transportation agencies get, and how can they use them as part of screening. And so the biking and walking being a key part of that. And do we need better ways of getting some of that data so that it can go into screening processes at transportation agencies as they decide what we're going to do. Next one is looking at that interagency collaboration. And this is really kind of a big deal. How do you get health people talking to transportation people? And I've definitely been seeing progress over the last 20 years we've been looking at this. Can we get people jointly trained? I mean, we have some courses now that are about health and built environment. There's some concurrent degrees. We have one at the University of Washington, Berkeley, and UNC, and others have those concurrent degrees. It will be like an urban planning degree and a public health degree. I'm not sure I've seen any public health and engineering, civil engineering, transportation concurrent programs. Have any of you seen that? I'm not aware of any. But we need some people with that kind of training that really have credibility in both fields. The value of the concurrent degree is that you can walk into either side and be credible because you have a degree in that field. What about bridge staff? Just getting people to go do a detail or spend some time in the other world, so that then you both sides learn from that. And the CDC has a way of detailing people to other places, and CDC has ways of it's called IPA, Emergency Personnel Agreement, of bringing people into CDC from other agencies. And so the extent that these kinds of mechanisms be used, state, federal, local, any of those levels, to get people from both sides talking to each other and learning each other's language, there's a lot of value in that. Yes?
Andy, this was really interesting, partly because of the cross-training and the coaching work that I do. And I wonder how you think about evaluating the impact of this kind of interagency collaboration and the bridge staff, whether or not there can be a standard evaluation of the impact of these individuals in the other field, or if it needs to be customized to the organization based on specific context.
That is a wonderful question. Would you like to do a project to figure that out? No, I think it's a really good question. How do you show the value? And it certainly would start with the anecdotal about, here's a project that went such and such a way because we had people from the other world that understood it. The longer term, exactly what you're saying, is there a way to get a more formal evaluation or do a survey of a whole bunch of places that did this? It's very appropriate. It's the kind of thing we would want to know more about. Good. And okay, next one is on economic evaluations, that as transportation and health work with each other, what would we show? And a lot of people like numbers and what we show on the costs and cost benefit analysis. And so that as we have more projects there, what methods do we need to do such economic evaluation? one project I would like to do, and I'm looking for anyone who would like to jump into it, is could we take, I don't pick big numbers, $1 billion worth of highway projects and $1 billion worth of transit projects, and evaluate what are the health impacts? And you probably would find something pretty favorable toward health in the transit, not so favorable in the highways. But if we could actually put some numbers on that this $1 billion in a highway didn't really buy us a whole lot of health and had some adverse effects, and $1 billion in transit had the following positive effects, that would be good to put some numbers on it. And I think it's actually a doable project that you could probably take a place like California or somewhere that would have multiple large projects and do some estimates for those kinds of things and compare them. So if anyone's interested in that, it's one I've been trying to figure out how to get done and meet someone who does something about how to do those kinds of economic evaluations. But I think there's a whole range of putting some numbers down with looking at those health impacts. There was one study by Thomas Gacci in Portland where he did cost-benefit analysis of bicycle infrastructure investment. You may have seen this a few years ago, where he was looked at like a 30-year investment in bikeways in Portland, and was able to show some very favorable cost benefit of both fuel savings, we got more bikes, but also healthcare cost savings of what long-term investment and more people using would do for health. So I think there's a whole range of economic issues there that are worth looking at. Next one is, let's use our newer technology. We have all sorts of mapping and data visualization platforms and new things being developed all the time. How can we best use them to look at transportation projects and look at health implications, because we can get this better information of what impacts various projects and policies will have. Next one has to do with non-fatal information, that the FARs and other systems already collect terrific data on fatal crashes, but we really don't have a lot on non-fatal crashes. From the public health world, we'd like to know more, particularly about pedestrians and bicycles. It's mostly fatal data. It's mostly if it involves a motor vehicle. And if it's a non-fatal or doesn't involve a motor vehicle, it doesn't get into any of the motor vehicle systems. We have some emergency room surveillance systems and so forth that collect some of that, but we really could do better data on non-fatal, particularly from pedestrians and bicycles. Next one is looking at simulation models. So can we do some forecasting longer term, get into things like heat island effects and flooding issues and their relation to land use and parking and roadway expansions, a whole range of things where we could do more on simulation models in terms of what's coming in the longer term as we make various transportation policy and project decisions. Another's going to be also modeling metrics related to how do you evaluate the health component when you do have policies that are generally favorable to health, so things like complete streets and safe routes to schools, if we will run into at various stages, have a lot of good health outcomes. So can we model them and be able to say, if you put in a complete streets policy or put in a safe routes to school program, here are some of the health benefits you will get, and you can get better models for that. Then the larger one, somewhat overlapping what we mentioned a minute ago, is how do we actually get training to the transportation planners and design and engineers? I mean, in my ideal world, every transportation and planning person would have some kind of introduction to the environment and health planning and health. How do we get it so that, and it really ought to be on both sides, that the public health people ought to be learning more about transportation and vice versa. And it kind of needs all of the above. It needs the short courses, it needs the continuing education, it needs the individual courses, it needs the degree programs. My ideal would be get into the accreditation for the professionals in both fields. So if accreditation for planning or accreditation for public health says you have to at least been introduced to the other field, that's a big step forward. That really makes it happen. It's one thing to say, gee, it would be nice if you had a course in this, but once you put it in accreditation standards, then it does start to happen everywhere. And that's not an easy lift to get there, but really would help get there. Next one is looking at recovery funds. So when we do have a disaster, thinking Katrina and New Orleans, how do you get the rebuild to look at what are those health considerations? And one of the things that happened in New Orleans was they had a number of outside groups that came in with some some absolutely wonderful plans on how you can rebuild the city to be favorable in so many different ways. Every plan is absolutely wonderful. And basically all those plans got rejected. They came from the outside, and the pressure from the inside, let's rebuild what we had, even though it could have been done better. And so how do you get some of that funding and planning to, when you are rebuilding after disaster? We have some disasters, we want to have more. Get it so that the health and equity are being considered in that rebuild, just to rebuild what we already had. Okay.
So is there an opportunity then to do that kind of study of what happened, using Katrina as an example? Have there been good studies of what happened?
There are certainly opportunities there. I don't know what studies have been done after Katrina. I've heard a few talks on it that basically says, so many good ideas got rejected because people wanted what they wanted. But I haven't seen one. You may have of what's been done, or there may still be room there. And there's certainly plenty of other disasters. The one success story I know was the tornado in, Greenberg, Kansas? Is that the right name? I can't remember the name. It was something like Greenberg, which the tornado basically took out the whole town. And when they rebuilt, they did it right. Because they could, and they had the visionary leadership to say, let's do it right. And it's not just replace exactly what we had. I think that's the right name. I think green was part of the name in there. And so those can happen after a disaster. And certainly, Katrina's getting a little bit old now, and certainly had some things that weren't ideal. But I think there's probably other examples you can find, doing it right or not after a disaster. Paradise, California, when you have the whole place burned down, what's going to be rebuilt there? Will not be done right. I don't know where they're headed on that. There's certainly been lots of opportunities.
Andy, is that a function, is the rebuilding for number 16 a function of just policy change that would say these metrics need to be incorporated in the rebuilding?
Yes.
Kind of like health impact assessment and integration of HIA into actual
The challenge that
policies.
you have is that federal structural standards that come from the U.S. Department of Transportation lay out how, in fact, we can reconstruct after a natural disaster is pretty strict, and typically they have you build to cost, which means the same thing goes back in that just got washed out. So there's submissions around that would really benefit from the kind of perspective that we want to take.
That is a major issue. FEMA does not allow upgrading very well. And there's a lot of places where rebuild is being blocked by FEMA from doing it right, based on how the rules are. And so that's certainly a policy issue that could be improved. And you get what the details on that and what you allow, how much FEMA money should be spent if the rebuild to do it right is more expensive than the rebuild was there. But a place like Puerto Rico had just a horrible time. Their infrastructure was horrible, and the rebuild of that could be done so well. You could put it in solar panel in a lot of places for a failing electrical grid. Just a lot of things there, and yet the politics and policies are making it very hard for Puerto Rico to upgrade because they were kind of a lot of failing systems and things like that.
Yeah, the political corruption. I have a studio report with the fact we're leaving next week. Maybe. Maybe. We're not quite sure, but we're planning to go anyway. As you know, it turns on a dime these days. The point I would make is that a lot of it is that the funds have not been transferred to Puerto Rico either. There's a whole issue about those funds being appropriated and being spent in other ways and diverted for other purposes. So the whole funnel of resources is a big issue. You really have to keep your eye on that after a natural disaster, because it just sort of dissipates. There's new structures that weren't there when the money was allocated that are now there. They get on it. So you have to kind of stay the course and really be fairly intentional about keeping your eye on everything. Even then it doesn't work, but at least you got a shot.
Yeah, the politics are very
It's
much.
crazy.
Many times there's a lot of money floating around. There's political interest in how it gets spent. May or may not be for the best of society. Okay, then get to transit a bit, and we're aware that transit has a lot of health benefits. We've done some work on the physical activity component, but there's issues of equity and air quality and road safety and foods and well-being and so forth, all related to transit. And what's the best way in promoting transit projects to get that health more prominent? And as things currently exist under many policies, it becomes a lot easier to spend money on roads and on transit. There's a to the extent that health can be more prominent as one of the reasons for doing transit, it can help transit projects move forward, and so, what are the ways to make that more visible? And some of the 18, how do you quantify it? And put some numbers in, and show there's actually some cost benefits that's favorable to transit.
One of the emerging trends now is a rethink about how we use and talk about transit, and that it is increasingly seen as certainly a major part of the transportation system, but not sufficient with regard to the greatest mobility that we might be more of an integrated, looking at micro mobility, autonomous technology, all kinds of new ways, so that the role of transit in the mix is kind of changing now.
Yeah.
And the question becomes, what is the relationship with transit and these new
Yeah,
opportunities to travel? There really
Absolutely.
will be some areas for us to look for in the future, because it's happening right now. And it's interesting, besides transit is losing ridership every day, and it's expensive. I like transit, I'm wood, but it's not now holding its own in terms of ridership. It's actually
Transit been fallen some
Yeah.
nationally on usage.
Which is upsetting.
Well, and one of the metrics that they don't really look at with transit stations very often is that they may talk about pedestrian access to the station, but they really don't talk very much about bicycle access.
That's
And it's the number of people who can easily
Right.
get to and from the station and to and from destinations. And I would love to see something that really pushed the metric of the bicycle routes to the station
Absolutely.
entrances.
That's a good
And
example.
not just
Yeah.
what's the density that a developer can get adjacent to the station, but let's look at this bigger picture. It's actually cheaper, and through policy, can have more influence and more impact than
Yeah.
just building lots and lots of
Good example.
buildings right there at the site.
When I lived in Baltimore, we had a light rail station near where we lived, and the transportation people wanted to know who was using the station, which was not particularly walkable. And they went around to the parking lot and apparently collected the license plates to see what zip codes were represented in the parking lot, just totally ignoring that anybody would even try to walk or bike there. They were defining the usage only by what was in the parking lot. Just and really no effort to make it more walkable, which I think was near a place that could have been better. But it's changing that mindset so that if you had someone sitting in the transportation department collecting that kind of data, it was like, wait a minute, this is not how you collect data, who the users are. We need that broader information. Okay, just a few more and then we'll
There's one more comment.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
I just wanted to say that the focus on in transit should also look at bus ridership, because I think we focus a lot on light rail or heavy rail stations, but bus ridership has been increasing in a lot of places because of the lack. Like if you look at Atlanta, where the MARTA train station goes, doesn't nearly go as far as the bus routes, and so
Yeah.
looking at bus stop quality and how people are getting to the bus stop is also very important.
There's a whole sort of tension between rail and buses, and the buses are certainly less expensive, can go more places, can be, moved to accommodate new needs more readily. But the other side of that is that people seem more willing to use rail than buses. Rail is generally a little bit faster because it doesn't stop at every light, and that there's no easy answer to that. But there is sort of, which do you want to spend resources on, and BRT, the bus rapid transit, sort of something halfway in between. The fact that buses can be moved really discourages developers from developing along the bus route, because the bus route could go away, whereby rail tends to be a more permanent investment, so that if you're trying to get redevelopment around transit, rail is going to attract better than buses, just because rail tends to stay there, buses can be moved rather than removed. But no, you need both systems, and you kind of need what's the best answer.
Andy, I think another piece of this is the routes there, not just are people walking and biking, but are there complete streets that are lead into these stations, and what's the length of those complete streets, and who's able to use them. And we have great examples from around the world where this is happening. So being able to build on those practices and see how they're measuring.
Okay, and then the last two are looking more at the emerging technologies. The first one is the micro-mobility, particularly the bike sharing and scooter. it's that last mile issue. What does that do to disparities? Can people without a lot of resource use them, or do they choose not to because there's still cost issues in using them? The health impacts, I mean, a shared bicycle, regular bicycle has some physical activity, an e-bike has a little, but certainly less than a regular bike. And there's some places where are doing shared bikes that are doing e-bikes only, not even offering the other type of bicycle. Scooters, a whole range of issues, where do they belong? Your basic infrastructure, do scooters and bikes belong on the street or on the sidewalk? They don't really fit that well in either place. They don't compete with cars well, but they sure don't mingle with pedestrians very well either. So a lot of issues there. And yet these are modes that are becoming more popular. Are they taking people away from transit? And so if you can get a shared electric bike that'll take you door to door from where you want to go, or you're not going to use the bus that you might have used otherwise, there's a whole lot of implications there. And then the last one is when we get to autonomous vehicles, and I've been going to TRB for a number of years, and every year there's new predictions of how soon they're going to be. All over the place. There's everything. A few years from now, you'll see a lot on the street. Others, it's decades away till you'll see a lot on the street. It's probably not going to 100% ever, and there's no reason that it needs to. So we're going to have some kind of mix. We don't know what that mix will be. And what are the implications of that? So in Washington State, our Washington State Transportation Commission put together a work group looking at implications of autonomous vehicles and get some infrastructure and finance and liability and all those issues. And in getting involved with them, they agreed that health and equity was worth looking at. So I am now the chair of the subcommittee for health and equity looking at autonomous vehicles in the state of Washington. And we're getting into some really interesting issues because while when you think about it, where do autonomous vehicles fit in with health and equity? And we're assuming it's probably going to reduce crashes because so many crashes are driver error, and certainly claim as autonomous vehicles will reduce that. The equity and access, it really depends on what the pricing is and where they go, where they're available. Land use can have major differences that the amount of parking, if we end up with a shared autonomous vehicle fleet, so that the autonomous AV that drops you off and goes and does another ride, we need a whole lot fewer vehicles out there, and we need a whole lot less parking. And that parking, the number I've heard is on the range of 8 parking spaces for every vehicle in the country. Well, we don't need 8 parking spaces for every vehicle if they're mostly shared vehicles or even a large proportion. That has incredible land use opportunities, particularly urban areas. I mean, how many parking lots and how much land is used for parking here. I would not want to invest in parking lots at this point. If this is really where it's going, there's going to be a whole lot of empty parking lots that now become available land that could have other possible uses and hopefully better uses than just storing cars. There are kind of threats to health in terms of walking and transit use, that if autonomous vehicles are just too easy, you tap on your cell phone and a vehicle shows up and takes you where you're going, and no parking, no nothing. Why would you even walk 2 blocks to a bus that's going to take you not quite where you want to go? And so there are kind of implications of potentially less walking, biking, and transit use if autonomous vehicles become really widespread. Changes in vehicle miles traveled is kind of unknown, that if they are done efficiently, you might reduce VMTs, but if you're taking people away from walking and biking, you might actually increase VMTs as there's more out there. You also could have a bunch of empty vehicles after it drops you off that doesn't need to park, so the AV is driving around empty for a while until it gets its next rider. That could actually increase VMTs because it's taking up road space and kind of going nowhere waiting for its next rider. Pedestrian and bicycles, it's really been one of the big issues in adoption of AVs is how well can they detect what's going on the road. And pedestrians and bikes are rather vulnerable road users, and AVs are getting better. But we get a whole range of things that don't necessarily get picked up by the technologies that AVs are using. The one talk I went to talked about, they use the term like anomalous situations, and the example they used, we have a woman in a wheelchair chasing a group of ducks across the road with a broom. So an AV sees that, picks it up on its LiDAR or radar, and tries to figure out what is this. I mean, yeah, things like that do occur, and so you'll get a whole collection of things. So it does the, yeah, I mean, it's kind of strange, but yeah, things will occur like that. How about the AV pick up the detour, or the pothole, or the, sea level rise that washed out part of the road, so you don't want to go near the edge, even though the map that's in its computer says, hey, you can go there. Somebody mentioned one yesterday of you can program into the AV that you can only drive on, the right side of the road, and it will prevent you from driving the wrong way on a road. Well, we have several coastal cities that turn their interstates into one way, all lanes. And, as your AV must say, well, we won't let you go in the other lane because it's programmed not to. And in the disaster, that's, the hurricane, that's what they're doing. They turn that interstate road into one way only. And so those kinds of things are solvable, but all of them need to be looked at before you go on widespread distribution. Access to health care, I mean, ideally that's going to be more favorable if an AV can pick up a person who doesn't have good transit, so ideally that gets better. The next one is one that's really been kind of intriguing on organ donors, and that is that if motor vehicle crashes actually go down by 50 or 75%, you'll have fewer crashes and fewer organ donors, and you can change the whole system of organ donation in the country. And so there's unintended consequences. They need people thinking these broader issues and come up with ones like that. And then real for the health world is job losses. We have an awful lot of delivery truck drivers, Uber and Lyft drivers, and others that potentially won't have jobs if you really have AVs doing a lot of the tasks that they are doing. So there's a whole range of issues, and they're all worth thinking about ahead of the curve and figuring out what can be done about that.
And there's also the micro scale. So once I get into an AV to get from point A to point B, I could leave my Starbucks cup, and I could leave my computer, and maybe the car will say, hey, remember to take all your items, but then once I get out of the vehicle,
When you leave for me, I'll come back.
and then you can't take my computer, or you get my trash, my Starbucks, right? So there's at least with the driver, the driver can say, hey, please take your trash with you.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of issues. I mean, the passenger who can't drive, who needs that hand getting in and out of the vehicle, is there to do it. Are you comfortable putting your 15-year-old into an AV? How about your 10-year-old? How about your 5-year-old? To what range is it going to be comfortable? What kind of monitoring do you want within the vehicle so that someone, if you yell help because something's going wrong, that there's some kind of monitoring, and you have privacy issues if there is that kind of monitoring, and so forth. Okay, down to the last couple slides, I'm going to open it. So that's the 20 that we picked out of this 120, just to give an idea of some of the areas that more research can be done. We need research, as always, it builds an evidence base for policy. It doesn't need to be done everywhere. If you do something in a few case studies in a few states, it can be somewhat generalizable if you can at least look at a few places, not just one, but it doesn't need to be repeated separately for every state. The resistance to change issue is important. So we have things like the road design manual and the manual of uniform traffic control devices. These are the standards used in the transportation world. And those are not changed all that easily. They get updated periodically. I understand there's some fairly substantial issues and fights that go on every time you want to change anything in them. And so that as the research says here's a better way to do it, you need to get into the standards of how things are done. And that's a somewhat slow process. And there's whole work in this area called implementation science that can help that. Okay. So let me end with that. The website is up here again. You can just search for the report there. At that link is also some of the background materials. But let me stop at that and wide open, talk about any of those areas or other things. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, and I appreciate your slide where you talked about creating the evidence base and the interdisciplinary thinking. So, right along that continuum of metrics and evidence, the methods come into play. And so I was wondering what your insights were in terms of this idea of interdisciplinary credibility and the idea that the agencies that actually fund work that we do here, there's been an increasing trend in saying we're only going to fund causal studies, or we want individual level models. Now, we know the barriers that exist around individual level data, whether it's electronic health records or claims data or things like that. And we know that a lot of transportation work cannot be causal studies just from the nature of the beast. So how do we then, and ecological models are not as credible. So how do we cross that? It almost seems like insurmountable because
I want to be polite to better leadership in those agencies that are deciding what's worth funding. And
Yeah.
so that to the extent that you can say we need these types of studies that cross things that aren't necessarily causal, that are being methods forward and so forth, that can get you where you need to go.
yeah.
NCHRP has this large pot of money and does fund things. Their orientation is toward what is practical and usable by the state transportation department. Several of the research needs listed in this report have now been submitted for funding by NCHRP. They have a synthesis process, and several will put in on that. They have a more regular, what's called, that you can put in. So we did work as a panel with the UNC group to get some submitted that were chosen among the longer list as ones more likely to be funded. I think we need other funding sources, and we need sort of like-minded higher levels in terms of what gets
Yeah, for
funded.
example, if NIH gets access.
I mean, NIH
Or
could fund it, Robert Johnson, I mean, a whole range of funding. And I think having the research roadmap out there and justifying what's needed, may help. If you're writing a grant, be able to say this was pointed out in this national well-known study as an area of need, that may help you get
Yeah,
funding.
I think it's just a question of figuring out what everybody feels is the science
Yeah.
and what is credible science. And for example, recently we had pushed back on using simulation modeling or something.
Oh, really?
And saying it wasn't credible.
And yet that's been done for years in many settings.
It's the bread and butter for transportation. And it almost makes sense because you want to get a sense of what might potentially work before you actually design an intervention. So it's actually an efficient way of seeing what might work, but we were told it's not a credible method.
I would hope that is not the broad view of all funders. I'm hoping that just means you ran into somebody who had a more narrow view of what's doing. And that may change. I mean, that to me is the long-term investment in getting people cross-trained and they will understand it. Because cross-training people get to the higher levels, they'll hopefully be making better choices. Jimmy?
And then kind of stemming from that to the cross-training and language, let's try to jot down each. I think your question number 7 gets at health and equity. And so I'm curious, clearly from the public health side, so much is driven by health equity, promoting equity, vulnerable populations, disparities, all that. What does that look like on the transportation side? Are they motivated by transportation equity? Is equity the term? Is it access for vulnerable? Like what does that conversation look like, and where is it on the transportation side? And is it the role for health to try and bring that thinking more into the transportation space?
Good question, Catherine. Do you have any comments on what does equity look like in the transportation world discussion?
I think now it's really focused largely on vulnerable populations because there's a general feeling that we can make a better case, that there's a lot of evidence that can actually bring to the benefit of investments to give greater access to vulnerable populations. So the equity bubble now is largely, because it's always focused on the funding stream. There's always been a lack of equity instead of the dollars that are actually funded. But now it's really focused on vulnerable populations and those populations with significant disabilities. That's kind of how it's largely being structured right now, with some success, I might add, because you can make the argument that there's been a misallocation of funds in many instances. Look at what resources have actually gone. You delineated and measured. You have a policy recommendation. How much is really going to those places and to those people, to those communities that really have not got their fair share, even under existing practices, federal requirements and funding.
How does, thinking about community health equity side, a big part of equity is empowerment, giving those communities the opportunity to engage thoughtfully in those processes. On the transportation side, it seems like an even even more technical and wonky space to actually get in policy, so how does a
Yeah, but
community member?
there are real requirements for the departments of transportation to have work for a response, a written response to every query around the project. So when we put it out, whatever comes out of public meetings, they have to have a written response that goes into the final report. But more importantly, I think a lot of the empowerment of communities has come around transportation projects and the rejection of many of those. Saying, no, this is not what we want. Maybe they would mobilize the community and actually get projects stopped that were not in the interest of the community. So very much that's a part of it.
So how do you get that flip where those communities are collaborating at the beginning rather than always coalescing around stopping a project, but coalescing around getting the right project done?
They're pretty active. I mean, there are a lot of communities, like NPUs, they keep a steady eye on this. It's not just, I was giving you an example because you asked where the focus is now. But there are contingencies in these communities that are very astute. They track this stuff in a policy component. They have implementation component, all within a community organization. And so they know what's coming. And in many instances, they've been pretty successful. Not as much as they should be, I'm not suggesting that, but, and there's a requirement for public involvement. Now it gets bastardized like many things do, but nonetheless, we do have that lead.
I mean, you certainly see projects where health is just ignored, and big highway projects, it's generally ignored. The one that's always bothered me when I was stepping on your toes was they spent, what, $150 million on the interchange between 85 and the road to Athens so people could get to the football game faster or something. That just absolutely no value to health. That was just an enormous sum for one highway project.
Well, you have things like the governor's road improvement program, which requires that you have X amount of asphalt into all communities in Georgia. And some of those, there's not enough cars to make the asphalt stay down. It's just a matter of ridiculous kinds of requirements that we live with, unfortunately.
A lot of it's leadership, but as you can get more people understanding both sides, then you can start to influence some decisions. There's always going to be some politics.
I think to Catherine's point too, there are also financial incentives involved on the transportation side. Like I'm aware of a project in Minneapolis where a grad student basically looked at all of the roadway miles in the city of Minneapolis and said, if you turned 10% of these into pedestrian-only streets, you would save this many hundreds of thousands of dollars in road maintenance costs. And they said, well, actually, we need to keep our total number of miles of roadway at this level to maintain our level of federal highway funding. But if you actually compared the numbers, they were saving more than they were getting from the federal government, and it was just like, and Minnesota actually, I think, is doing a lot of the work that you're talking about. Like they have actually a autonomous vehicle committee under the governor that has people from the Department of Health sitting on it, and there's been a lot of cross-pollination of their Department of Health and Transportation. So I don't mean to bring Minnesota up as an example of bad places that are doing a lot of innovative work, but there are so many financial incentives built into transportation, the transportation world. So
And some of that's high-level policy that
Right.
can't be changed.
Right.
Then it takes some political will to get there.
Yeah.
Other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Are you aware, I think one of the research you identified was getting health indicators and prioritizing transportation projects that are funded. Are you aware of any states that have any kind of metrics?
Jimmy, Nashville.
I was just noticing that clock was not correct up there, so it's like you. So the metrics in the mind, so.
Yeah, so Nashville MPO, which Jimmy was involved in, would you want to say how they got health indicators?
Yeah, very minimally involved. I came right at the end as they had created, this goes to the equity question, they created sort of, forget the exact terminology, but it was basically high inequity areas and then prioritize pedestrian and bicycle, non-motorized funding to those areas with some limited success, I think. And then the time when I was there was when they were starting their whole new, I forget all the right terms, but the whole modeling and the transportation planning process for the next 20 years. And we're looking at how to enhance that or build upon it. And I couldn't tell you exactly where they landed.
And it's on the MPO level.
Yes. And I think that goes back to the idea that what they ended up with in that first setting was more equity, disparity, vulnerability based rather than an actual physical activity measure or a chronic disease. It wasn't so much based on health outcomes, it was based on the same vulnerable groups and trying to target investment in the areas where those people lived more so, or where those people lived and traveled to, so they did look at that dimension of it.
But what I love about the Nashville story was that they added a criteria on their grant application form that gave, what was it, 5, 10 points out of 100 for a project that had an active transportation component. And in one round, it went from, what, less than 10% of the projects having that kind of component to over 70% of them in one round of funding. So the power of that evaluation criteria in grant funding is just amazing.
And that's one of the things that with Plan 2040 that Catherine led for the ARC that was incorporated, that health measures would be part of their scoring for the student. So one of the things that I didn't see in your list of 20, and perhaps it's in the longer list, is assessing the micro and mesoscales, not just the macro scale, and just thinking about how the feeling of being on a road as a pedestrian or as a bicyclist, the measurement of that feeling of the placement of trees, the width of the sidewalk, the quality of the sidewalk, the placement of windows, the length of the streets. How do those measures get incorporated? And we know that the micro measures are a lot easier to pull than the macro measures are easier to pull than the micro and meso. But using things like Google Street View, for example, would be a fantastic way to pull the micro and meso scale measures, but we have to overcome the data sharing challenges there. And so I wonder what your thoughts are on
I don't remember seeing that in the longer list specifically. You would need metrics, the feel of a street is not something I can easily put on a number, and yet, you could probably get a bunch of people who would agree of what feels comfortable and what doesn't, but metrics on all sorts of things that probably could be researched in and of itself to get a dimension there. We do know certain characteristics that make something comfortable, the width of a sidewalk and not being where the car is going practically elbow distance from you, having street trees that make the sidewalk more comfortable. One I was intrigued by was, I never thought about is walking next to a blank wall feels uncomfortable. And I never thought about it until somebody pointed out, but yeah, it does, but you can kind of see
I like it, Andy.
So, yeah.
So there you go.
Actually, I don't like it.
No, I was working with GDOT on their pedestrian guidelines, and new ones came out last year. And I kept trying to tell them that they needed to say that a minimum sidewalk width needed to be 6 feet wide because they needed to be wide enough for at least 2 people to walk side by side. And I could not get them to do it because they said they couldn't find any place else that had that as a standard. So,
have you ever seen it elsewhere that puts my sense is it may vary by likely use, and certainly in a busy city it's got to be wider than a suburban neighborhood, but I would think somebody is.
now everybody goes with 5 feet because that's what's been out there.
That's
That's not wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side comfortably on the sidewalk. So that's why I was hoping CDC would come out with that as a guide.
It's probably hard to prove that 6 feet versus 5 feet has health benefits. You can certainly see it, it's more comfortable and all that, but if they're really going to pin you down, what can you show is better at the 6 feet, that level, a little more comfortable, is going to be harder to prove. But they call it the design vehicle, which is, when you design a road or a street, who's the intended user. And the one joke was, well, we ought to be designing sidewalks so 2 guys with a cooler beer between them can comfortably walk. but things actually, baby strollers ought to be able to go next to each other or past each other comfortably. That's a piece of a sidewalk. So every reason I think that could be good.
So Andy, there is work that's being done to using I don't know if it's big data or not, but using Google Street View images to identify sky, road, building, and sidewalk, and then based on the appropriate algorithm are able to predict whether or not an area is walkable or how walkable an area is. Columbia, here at Tech, and at other places are doing that. But the main difficulty is just getting that data and not getting a call from Google to say, why are you downloading all of these images?
That's negotiable, but yeah, no, my understanding is Google will allow sort of small use, but once you want to do a larger scale, they won't like, oh, I think they're in business. And so, you know, what can be done there is really hard to match that database with what they have, so it may just be negotiating what can you afford to pay. I did see a talk recently that was just that kind of thing, using Google Street View to look at sidewalks. They looked at a number of things, including things like whether there's overhead wires, and trying to see how well could Google Street View pick that off, and sidewalks and other things. And some of that, you're not going to get perfect. You know, you got, you know, where there's parked cars blocking the view of the sidewalk, and the ability
You get the roof line, and all that goes up. You don't get what's underneath.
yeah, what's under there. Things like an inch or two gap in a sidewalk, or a vertical inch or two that really can be a hazard on a sidewalk isn't going to be picked up all that well on a street view. It's just not really quite close enough. So I think Google Street View is a real good start. You'll get some information. It's not as perfect as that you can't afford the labor that are going along every street and do it periodically. So you get part of the way there, but you're right that the costs and things need to negotiate.
And to go from the crack in the sidewalk, to zoom way out, to just public perception, and you mentioned sort of decision maker mindset, but I think there's a big public dimension of this as well. And given the current increased attention to public health, given COVID-19, it sort of relates to topic 3 and 16. It's not disaster, but still emergency. Are there any windows of opportunity, given the current attention to public health nationally, that could advance some of these conversations in a real way? Or is it, we need to focus on the emergent threat right now? Is there some way to get these two things into conversation at the same time?
Really good question. I guess I would like to hope that as people recognize the need for a decent public health infrastructure, that they, you know, grow resources rather than cut resources. And, as people are finding they need a robust infrastructure when you have to respond to a problem, that you can help. How to package that, how to sell that right while you're in the middle of the viral thing, make it harder. And, yeah, look how quickly Congress went to what, $8 billion or something on responding. Yeah, but they want something that can make it happen. I think longer term, doing what we can do in public health shows its value and makes it a little bit easier to, you know, manage this budget or grow. I don't have specific things. You know, we want to be pushing for this money for this specific thing. Yeah.
So in a couple different places, you mentioned things like social cohesion, well-being, stress. What kind of appetite is there for kind of that specific sort of health outcome related to transportation and health research in your perception?
My sense, and I'm sure that people will disagree from the social sciences, is they are softer measures. It's much harder to put a good metric on your sense of well-being and whatever as compared to, you know, cases of disease or number of injuries. I use the word co-benefits a lot. That if you're doing it right and you're getting some physical activity, and by the way, you're getting some social interactions because you have somebody to walk with and all those, I look at them all as co-benefits, and I'm kind of less concerned. I can probably put a dollar figure on healthcare cost savings from being physically active and not getting all the obesity-related diseases. I probably have a much harder time putting on healthcare cost savings on better social connectedness. And yet, so if they're all happening together, I wouldn't necessarily even worry about putting a dollar figure on the ones that are just harder to measure. But I think they ought to be in the picture and be included, even if you can't, you know, measure them.
That's some of the benefits of technology, because I know at UNC they were doing type of modeling with like blood pressure and your heart rate when they showed you different simulations in like a virtual reality of different streets and trying to assess how your heart rate changed or your blood pressure changed when you were virtually in a different environment to kind of measure your stress. So new technologies help making it easier to do so.
Yeah, that's one way. look at it. I work with some people who are doing nature contact and trying to show health benefits there, and I think we all, with it, I think, you know, we're comfortable saying there are benefits of nature contact, but trying to measure those in terms of health is not that easy. I mean, you know, it shows some, you know, blood pressure, cortisol, or stress, or whatever, but some things are easier to measure than others. I think as long as you keep them all on the list and then measure the ones that are easier, and they kind of tag along as co-benefits and we're in the right direction. How are we on time? Or?
I think we're almost there. Any more questions?
Any last? I'll hang around a bit to chat with a few people.
Well, if not, let's give Andy a round. Thank you. He's around for a couple of minutes and right.
Okay.
Yes.